Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the call this morning. I'm based in Houston, Texas. As Andy said, my name is Michael Hughes. I'm the Global Vice President of Business Development with Arpin. And I myself actually am a former expat to the region. So I was an expat in Egypt in 2005 and also in Asia for over a decade. I find the region personally extremely exciting because it has the opportunity to build dreams. And I don't say that lightly, especially what Lauren will present later on about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. It's a very, very exciting region, and also how it's linked to the rest of the world, including Europe, as well as very close ties to India. Those are exciting opportunities to explore, and companies and businesses around the world are recognizing that as well and diving into the region.
So I'm Lauren Inglis. I work as the Regional Director for Arpin Group for the Middle East and India. I am based in Dubai in the UAE, where I've lived for the last 11 years. And as you may tell from my accent, I'm originally from South Africa. And prior to Dubai, I was actually living in Scotland, where all of my family are from. Arpin Group is one of the longest-known family moving companies. And one of the great things about working and living here in this region is getting to meet so many different expats from all over the world. For me, the best part is that there are over 200 nationalities living here in the UAE alone. Learning from other people about cultures and traditions and making friends from all over the world is really what drew me in to being here. And right from the beginning, when I moved here, I found it really easy to network and make friends when I first moved here, and I continue to do so now. The safety factor for me, of course, coming from South Africa is huge. Growing kids here is an amazing place in terms of the safety, the level of education, and just the whole region has a lot of opportunity, like Michael said. So it's no secret that the Middle East and India regions can be very challenging locations to move to. Aside from the cultural differences, language barriers, and the country's bureaucracies, when it comes to relocation, and on our side of things, the household goods and personal effects moving and shipping, there's a whole new and complicated set of rules to follow. Today, I wanted to take you on a journey through the region, provide you with some insights to life in the Middle East and India, the regulations and requirements for household goods relocations in the region, and open a discussion in the chat to address your pain points in each of these countries in your daily role of relocating employees. So these are the countries managed by the Arpin Middle East office. It's, as you can see, quite a lot of countries to look after, and they're all very different. Today, we'll mainly be focusing on the UAE, Saudi Arabia, with an overview of some of the Gulf countries too. Here in the region, the main spoken language is Arabic, but most of these countries do focus on English being the core language spoken in business. Traveling to this region, you'll find that many flights are transited via Dubai or Abu Dhabi international airports. The UAE is what's actually known as the travel hub because Emirates and Etihad Airways offer various onward journey flights to all continents. You also have Hamad Airport in Doha, Qatar. It's also one of the region's hubs and also offers many onward journey flights to other continents. As I mentioned, each country is very different in their own traditions. The region differs from others with a very strong Islamic way of life and Arab culture. The countries we look after from our Arpin India office would be Pakistan, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Of course, out of these countries today, the main focus will be India, being such a hot topic in relocation this year.
And we received a lot of questions in advance, and we're going to cover some of those. From a high-level view, we're going to look at, first off, some of the watch-outs for the region. What do we look out for, and what are some good things for you yourselves to be aware of when you're counseling your transferees when they're preparing to go from Europe or from the US or other locations into the Middle East? These are going to be great things for them to know about. We're going to dive into a few other questions that you've asked as well, but we're going to start out with the watchouts from a high-level view with the UAE and Saudi Arabia relocations.
Okay, so here in this region, for UAE and Saudi specifically, but also for the whole region, I guess, cultural awareness is key. These are Muslim countries with strict rules to adhere to, such as proper behavior, treating others with respect, strict rules for posting on social media, no public displays of affection. I always like to explain to new arrivals in the country that the rules are very clear and defined. You stick to the rules and you will lead a quality life. You disobey them and the consequences implemented by the government are ruthless. The rules have become more lenient in the UAE over the years, and recently it was announced that non-married couples can legally cohabitate and have children out of wedlock. However, expats do need to be aware that in Saudi Arabia, cohabitation and sexual relations outside of marriage, including adultery, is still illegal. The Gulf countries make for some of the safest places in the world to live due to their extremely low violent and petty crime rates. This is because of the strict laws and harsh punishments. Sharia law is enforced in these countries, and this gives guidance to public behavior, personal behavior, and even personal spiritual beliefs. You'll notice in one of the images I've put a dress code in there. These are signs that you typically do see a lot going into shopping malls, especially in the UAE, Saudi Arabia. Dress appropriately. You will see signs in the malls and in public places saying, wear respectful clothing. Women are expected to cover their shoulders and knees in public places. In the UAE, it has become more relaxed, but it's important to remain respectful, and you may not welcome or feel comfortable with the stares and strange looks you receive if dressed inappropriately. And that's not just from the men, it's also from the women. It will make you feel really uncomfortable. So it's just best to err on the side of caution. It is no longer compulsory for women to wear an abaya or hijab, however, in Saudi Arabia. However, many Saudi women do still prefer to wear their customary dress when they're in public places. You'll see some expat women wearing an abaya as well as a sign of respect. You will no longer see religious policemen on the streets in Saudi. When it comes to renting property, rent payments are made in advance for the year via bank transfer or in the form of post-dated checks. This is an extremely important aspect to inform company stakeholders for budget purposes if rent is fully covered, or inform the assignees if not. The rental market here is fast, really, really fast. If you don't have your ID documents, visas, and if you don't bring your checkbook with you to the viewing, you can expect that there are maybe another 10 people or families waiting behind you to snatch up the property that you just saw and fallen in love with. But patience is a virtue. Simple paperwork for visas, housing contracts, banking, etc. takes longer than what you'd expect in other countries. And when you are told it will be done tomorrow, inshallah, this means God willing. This is particularly prevalent during the holy month of Ramadan. The countries tend to be on a slow down period during the holy month. Driving is fast, defensive, and stressful. Hesitate and there could be an accident. Miss an exit and you end up in another emirate or another city. No hand gestures, shouting, or foul language at other drivers is allowed. This could land you in prison and or being deported from the country. There was, many years ago, I actually will never forget this, there was a survey done many years ago, and what the results of the survey that had come about, one of the questions was, why don't people indicate on the roads in the UAE? And it actually came out, people were saying they see it as a sign of weakness, which I thought was pretty comical. In the UAE, VoIP, voice operated internet programs or calls, are actually banned. Skype, FaceTime, WhatsApp calls and Facebook calls, all of it blocked. However, there are some alternatives that we can use here, like Zoom Cloud, Microsoft Teams, as you can tell, Skype for Business, Botim, and CMe. While personal VPN legality is complex and business VPNs are acceptable, as the saying goes, Big Brother is always watching. The cybersecurity teams here do heavily monitor online content to ensure cyber safety.
And as we jump into the relocation challenges, I just wanted to note on the last slide, if some of you guys were asking, what is KSA? That's the abbreviation for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, just to highlight that if there were questions. So beyond the watchouts, there are some relocation challenges that are going to be very important to be aware of, things to be thinking of, especially when families are moving out there. Sometimes you may have short business trips that are going to the region, and these type of or these topics are going to affect the communications that they might have with their teams across global locations, and especially if they're managing out of the UAE, which is quite common. People moving into the region to manage multiple locations, even the term EMEA, including Europe, Africa, etc., they would be on the local times, local schedules, and it's things to be aware of so that they're preparing their schedule. So, Lauren, why don't you dive into some of the key topics that we can look out for when we're relocating to these areas? And then we can take a look at the countries specifically, including India, and as you suggested, a whole looking at the UAE and the various countries within the UAE.
Some of the things to be aware of and challenges that we face in relocations for the region. The summertime heat can reach between 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. For everybody in the States, that's 104 to 122 Fahrenheit. No joke. This makes conditions very challenging for expats to adjust to when arriving in June, July, or August. And bear in mind, the schools usually start around end of August, beginning September. So, June, July, August is more or less when a lot of expats tend to arrive here if they're moving here to start assignments. So that it is very difficult for them to adjust to when they first arrive. Moving out of the region at this time of the year is also peak season due to schools closing at the end of June. So we strongly recommend that if you are relocating assignees around then, you should be initiating the household goods move by around March or April to ensure that we have availability of resources and crew. This time of the year is also strenuous for the moving crews loading a container. Inside container temperatures can be up to 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Most packs and deliveries are done on Saturdays at no extra cost. Sunday is the only day that the crews do not work in the UAE unless overtime is arranged. But many building or property managements actually don't allow you to come in as a moving company and work on a Sunday. Ramadan. So in Ramadan, this lasts for approximately 1 month. The date is depending on the sighting of the moon, and usually Ramadan start date will be announced by the night before. This year, it started on the 22nd of March. It gets earlier by a month every year. All companies by law must reduce their working hours and operate with skeleton staff. Eid holidays, which is actually predicted for later this week. We think it's going to be on the 20th or 21st of April. This follows Ramadan, and it lasts for approximately 4 to 10 days, depending on where you are in the region. Saudi Arabia tends to take a longer Eid break than the likes of the UAE, for example, and occurs again in July. There's another Eid holiday in July. Observances can result in customs clearance backlogs that can be over a month. This, of course, tends to happen because reduced working hours, skeleton staff. It does tend to create a bit of a challenge for us during this time, and managing expectations and constant communication with assignees is absolutely vital because, of course, it's going to affect extension of their temp accommodation if shipment's not cleared and it's not delivered or available for delivery. Now, we were asked some questions relating to immigration in these regions. While we don't handle immigration directly, I can give you a basic overview of the process specifically in the UAE, only because I've lived here for so long and I've gone through this process several times myself over the years. So generally what happens is companies tend to either have a dedicated PRO or they direct the assignee on where to go to start the process for the residency cards and ID cards, providing they've, of course, arrived on an employment visa. It's recommended to have an Arabic speaker or PRO accompany the assignee to the government offices. The first step in the process is that you apply online for the visa change status from a tourist or an entry visa to an employment visa. And that has to be done by the sponsor or the company. The PRO usually takes the employee to the medical center for their blood tests and X-ray scans. After receiving the past medical results, the PRO then applies for the status change again from employment visa to actual residency visa and ID cards as well. The ID cards and residency visa usually take approximately 2 to 3 weeks after passing the medical. And that's critical information, which I will get back to in just a second. There was also another question that came through asking who is eligible for dependent visa sponsorship. As a dependent, can they also work or strictly to stay with the primary visa holder? We don't, as I said, we don't manage visa and immigration. So again, this is an overview. Most countries in the Gulf happen to have a salary threshold to meet in order to actually sponsor your dependents. Your spouse in the region, the visa that's issued for your spouse usually says not allowed to work. It's got that clause in the actual visa. Dependents are expected to obtain their own working visa if they want to work. Some of the documents, I just want to very briefly touch. I don't want to go too much into every single detail of household documents, but it is very important for global mobility and HR professionals to know and understand the documents that are involved in the household goods process, because this tends to actually be causes one of the highest levels of stress for assignees. And I'll take you through it very briefly. So household goods documents for imports. There is a common misconception that we can ship the household goods from origin, wherever that may be, into the UAE. And this kind of pretty much applies for all countries in the Middle East. without having the actual residency visa. A lot of assignees, as soon as they get their entry or their employment visa, they ask us to ship their goods and get the goods moving. It's not the case. It's important that we set expectations from the outset on the timeline for shipping the household goods and customs clearance estimated timings as well. Only speaking for the UAE, only once the UAE actual residency visa copy is received, along with the shipper's signed authorization letters, which we send to them for signing, then we'll be able to obtain the customs green light to book a container or book a cargo flight if it's air freight and route the goods. This can take approximately 2 to 3 weeks, as I mentioned, once they've passed their medical exam to get that actual residency visa. Over here in the UAE, they are issuing the UAE residency visa digitally now, and it's become really important to also give assignees advice that maybe their local HR are not giving them, such as which apps to download. The ICA app, for example, these are the government apps in the UAE, and the UAE Pass app, because as soon as they receive the actual UAE residency visa, they can log into it on the app and they're able to email it directly out of the app, which is fantastic and a much welcome change for us over here, because you really do need a residency visa for everything and your ID cards as well.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in very quickly because we had a few questions come in through the chat. And would it be okay if I address those with you and ask those questions before we move into India and to the rest of the region?
Yeah, sure.
Is now a good time? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
So I'll go backwards based on the theme that you were talking about, just with the UAE residency and documentation. One of the questions was about the threshold that you were mentioning for the salary. Do you happen to know offhand what that threshold would be, or is it different for each country?
It's very different for each country. And the salary threshold that I knew of many years ago has more than likely changed since, just because everything here has changed so rapidly. Definitely something that I can look into, though, if you'd like to reach out after the workshop, and I'll get that answered for you.
Fantastic. And then we had 2 questions about family demographics that were absolutely fantastic questions to think about when you're moving employees into the region. The first one was, how do you deal with families that have either children with disabilities in the region? Are there facilities? Is there possibilities? I know each country is going to be different in terms of what they can support, but are there any good examples, for example, perhaps Dubai or Abu Dhabi, that have programs that help families with children with disabilities moving into that area?
Yes, actually, that is a fantastic question. There are, and it's actually, for me, living here for so long and seeing the place change so much, it's so wonderful to see the country really placing an emphasis on people of determination. Over here, there are so many different organizations opening. I really mainly know all of this since I've become a mom myself, and I'm on all of these mom groups, and of course the expat groups all talk about it very much as well. Offhand, I wouldn't be able to spout off the names of the corporations or groups or anything like that, but I do know for sure that there have been definite loads more conversations had and loads more action taken in terms of assisting children with disabilities and people with disabilities in general, because it wasn't something that had much focus in this region at all. It was never discussed. It was very taboo, I guess.
Interesting. And how about families? My husband and I were thinking about this as well when we were looking at the Middle East. How about families that are same-sex relations, whether they're married or a pack agreement or even cohabitation. How does that situation work with those kind of families that are moving into the region? And again, we're talking about a very big region, each country having different rules and regulations, Cairo versus Dubai versus India. But generally speaking, if we're looking at the UAE or the Gulf states, are there any concerns? Is there any kind of advice that you could give about the situation for same-sex couples moving into the area?
Unfortunately, this region is still not recognizing same-sex couples at all, really. And it is down to, the religious beliefs mainly. However, who knows in the future, because there's been so many radical changes in this region. I mean, we've had news this year of there being a casino. Can you even imagine? For this region, that's huge. They're going to be they're working on opening a casino in Ras Al Khaimah, one of the other emirates here. So I don't think that it is going to be forever beyond the realms of possibility for the region. I personally do know same-sex couples here. It's very difficult for them. They are not allowed to. I mean, look, public displays of affection is a no-go here anyway. But living together is, I think, more widely accepted because non-married couples can live together now. So it just wouldn't be an outspoken thing, if I can put it that way.
Okay. And then one last question before we jump into India. And thank you for Galito, Estrelita, and Leonard, Veronica Aliaga, and Sarah Fleming for those questions. The last question that came from Veronica was about previously, Lauren, you were talking about if there's any infractions against the strict rules in the UAE, there's consequences of deportation, arrest, etc. Do the companies hold any liability in those kind of situations?
That's a great question, and with it comes a story. The overall answer to that question is it really depends on the company, how much they want to get involved in a situation like that. There have been instances that I've heard of, particularly surrounding household goods shipments, because obviously we know who all of the main movers are in the region and things like that. There have been stories in the industry that have come out of, for an example and a case study, I guess, there was a shipment that was packed in Lebanon and it was moved to the UAE. The woman didn't realize, and the crew knew no better because they basically packed an entire cabinet, and inside the cabinet were bullets, like gun shells. And of course, inside a shipment, that's a very big no-no. Coming to the UAE, 98% of containers are inspected by customs, and customs found the bullets. And she was asked to come down to, the shipper herself was asked to come down to customs. They questioned her. They put her in jail. The company, of course, have just hired this woman and are trying to do everything they can in terms of speaking to government officials, but really getting nowhere. And that's kind of the gist of it. It is down to the company how much they would like to try and get involved. Companies end up getting their employees out of a sticky situation like that. Personally, I don't believe so. The law is the law here. It's very strict. And, as I said in the beginning, the rules are the rules. You stick to the rules and you're good. In a situation like that, it's very unfortunate because she wasn't aware that those gun shells or bullets were even packed in her shipment in the first place. She said, anyway. And neither were the crew. So it was a case of who's going to get the blame here. But no,
I think
I
that
don't
brings up a very good point, Lauren. Like, what do we do as an international moving company to make sure that we hedge against those risks and make sure that the employees themselves have all the information available to them? Are there special things that we do along that move timeline and process that ensures that they actually are informed? I mean, I understand that this case you're talking about is not one that we particularly handled. It was in the news. But as Arpin International, we're handling the assignees that are moving into the region. How do we help to educate them on what items are prohibited?
Well, I think for me, what is absolutely crucial when I'm managing a move into this region, and I mean, I get really excited, and especially, obviously, I look after people moving out too, but I get really excited when I'm moving people in because it's like, it reminds me of when I first moved here. But managing expectations is the absolute key here. And the briefing call, I would say, the briefing call and the documentation packs that go out to them, or should I say links now, that go out to them. It's really, really important that you stress in the briefing call and manage their expectations of what sort of items are allowed and restricted and prohibited. All of that does go out to them in the intro email, but is really widely discussed in the briefing call as well. And I think it's not so much an expectation for us as the mover to expect the shipper to tell us about something that they might be concerned about. It is more, very importantly, about us asking the questions as well. Do you have anything that could be prohibited, such as, and, kind of run through the list with them as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for folks on the call, what Arpin does as well is because in terms of compliance and liability, we do require signatures on these documents. So we have what we call a international guide to moving that is actually required to be signed, and it's sent out. And it's part of a milestone where employees are not able to move further down the line unless they sign off on these documents that cover specifically black and white prohibited items. I would say for a takeaway from a global mobility perspective is, especially dealing with expats that have moved multiple times, this is not just another move. And I've had families like from Hong Kong moving into UAE that have been in Africa before, and they've moved multiple times. I think it does due diligence to stress that these are the rules, these are the regulations, and they're not flexible. And to Lauren's point about case studies, that family were moving from Hong Kong. He was a Hong Kong professor, and he was in Africa, and he was a professor of anthropology. So he had masks, the wood carved mask, and what things would have been considered in Saudi Arabia as icons. And he was not accepting that these are actually prohibited items, illegal items in Saudi Arabia. And I think it's important to stress that and stage that from the very, very beginning part, is that if you're moving into the region, life can be really, really good if you follow the rules, and there's no flexibility when it comes to the rules. The UAE is also a very hot region, not just because of the desert, but also in terms of business. So there's a lot of people that want to go into the area. And they also, especially from the UAE too, and probably even now Saudi Arabia, once you talk about that, Lauren, there is a selection process where they're looking to grow. They have plans of development from cities, from projects, etc. They're not just accepting anybody and everybody to come in. So from their perspective, it's a privilege for you to be able to be in these locations, to serve in these locations and be part of that development, which also gives them the full authority and right, as it should be, to choose who gets to stay. And if you break the laws, if you break the rules, then it's an ultimate deportation or arrest. So thank you so much for covering those questions. Why don't we jump into some of the regions that will help to answer a lot of the questions that folks had. We're going to start looking at India, I believe, and then after that, we'll look into the Gulf states, including the UAE. So take it away, Lauren.
Great, thank you. So discussing India, I really wanted to highlight some of the positives for expats that are moving into India, just because there really are, it is such a hot country at the moment. And there are so many international corporations that are moving in and opening shop in India as well. So First and foremost, it's a country of contrast and diversity. Most expats find it really affordable to have a driver or chauffeur, a cook, a cleaner, helping them at home in their daily life. It should be noted, though, that finding home help when you first arrive is not always a very easy task, and it's recommended that you join social media community groups for referrals. Indians are known to be warm, welcoming, and friendly people. So they say it's very easy to make friends if you put yourself out there. And also locals love expats when they're out spending money, and they tend to provide excellent service. There are some wonderful festivals to get involved in with the locals in India. The array of colors, foods, spices, and everything is just a cultural journey, really. Some of the festivals include the Holi Festival, Onam, and Diwali. Expats who are in India, just to jump into a little bit of residence permit and documentation as well. It's really important if you're sending assignees there who are going to be there for longer than 180 days, that they should apply for the FRRO, which is the residence permit. And having the FRRO also allows them to travel within India and explore other regions. It's also really important to know that the FRRO, getting that document is not an easy process. It is complicated, complex, and time-consuming, especially for expats who may struggle to actually do that themselves. So it may be easier and better for you and for the assignee to have perhaps the local DSP helping arrange that, or visa and immigration specialist on the ground in India. If you do need help with any contacts for any of those services, as I mentioned earlier, don't hesitate, just drop me a line and I will be more than happy to refer you to some of the partners over there that we work with and know. India is also a great place to raise a family. While the public schooling system could definitely use some help from the government, the private and the international schools are as high quality as the education standards overall in India. We had a really interesting question come in as well about what is the mobility trend that we're seeing post-COVID in India. So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit for you and give you an update from our perspective at Arpin, what we've been seeing. So we have actually been seeing a shift in what looks like the hiring locations when moving Indian nationals on overseas assignments. The companies that we are managing relocations for appear to be hiring from outstation locations and not just from the main and metro cities. These locations include areas such as Vishakhapatnam, Bardez, Kadapa, Nichlol, Vijayawada, Solapur, and Aurangabad, to name a few of them. Prior to COVID, and even in 2017 and 2018, we hadn't seen many multinational companies or corporations hiring from these locations. So my pronunciation has had to get a lot better. I had to ask my colleagues to help me to pronounce all of these places. The demand for skilled professionals moving from metro cities to the outstation cities has also increased, and we are seeing this is what we're seeing on our domestic side for intra-India relocations as well. To delve very lightly into the documents required, because it's very, very difficult and complicated in India in terms of documentation for household goods shipments as well. The most important thing that you need to know when you are moving household goods into India, or your assignees household goods into India, the original passport is needed. And especially for expatriates moving into India, it's not always a comfortable thing to ask people, can you just stick your passport in a courier to me? No, it's a very difficult thing to have to deal with. Unfortunately, in India, this is how it works, and it's part of the process. So they do need to allow a local collection of their original passport, and they need to allow us to courier the passport depending on the location for customs clearance purposes. The original passport is mandatory for customs clearance. It's non-negotiable. A photocopy or attested copies of the passport is just not accepted by Indian customs at all. With hope for the future and, looking at India in terms of how much they are pushing things forward digitally and things like that, I'm really fingers crossed that process becomes easier for our assignees that are moving in and shippers moving in. So for availing the transfer of residence, the passport must be a minimum of 3 years old, and the transfer of residence will help you to avoid paying huge amounts of duties and taxes, although duties and taxes are applicable on every shipment coming into India. But if you have the transfer of residence, you can manage to get that down a bit. The passport has to be a minimum of 3 years old to the date of arrival in India. And that is absolutely important. We had an instance during COVID that really was everyone's worst nightmare. An Indian couple that we moved had been in China on assignment, and they were looking to bring their goods back during COVID, or just after the country had opened up. And because they had been out of the country longer than 3 years to the date of arrival, when they got back, customs had a massive issue with it. And we had to do everything in our power to try and actually clear the shipment, with additional letters being requested from the company, from the assignee. It was absolute disaster. We did it in the end, though. If this is not the case, then the previous expired passport in original, which, as you know, not everyone keeps, is also required to scrutinize the previous data for the last 3 years. As per Indian customs regulations, we will have to keep that original passport with us for 7 to 10 working days for customs clearance processing. Now, when we tell shippers it's 7 to 10 days for customs clearance, it's extremely important that we always stress to them, we are not in control of customs. We are at the mercy of customs. Customs are a government entity. So we can give you an approximate time frame on how long the customs clearance for your shipment will take. However, there is no guarantee. And we also don't receive updates. And this goes for every country. We don't receive updates from customs to say, oh yeah, the clearance is going up tomorrow. They don't give you that. It's a case of, this is roughly how long it takes. And we have to keep monitoring it for the final release of the shipment so we can deliver it. These shipments into Bangalore and Chennai, the shipper's physical presence is required at customs. This is one of the other complexities of moving household goods into India as well. Because shippers, if they're not moving to Bangalore or Chennai, they are expected to actually fly across to wherever it is that they're moving to and go and present themselves at the customs office. We do give them all the guidance in the world as to how to go about this. And we have in the past also by HRs been asked to arrange collection from their temp accommodation, take them, directly to, or say they're staying in a hotel for a couple of days, we'll pick them up and take them to the customs area to actually help them to get the clearance done, stay with them. And especially, actually, it's not even just for expats, even because India is such a massive country, and each area and region is so different. Even even Indian nationals who are going to another city where they perhaps have never been before find it really daunting to go to a customs office in another city. So yeah, we have had those requests before that can be arranged if need be for your assignees as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all shipments to India are subject to duties and taxes. Only household goods used for more than 6 months are eligible for duty-free entry. Residence permits, I touched on that already a little bit. There are appointment letters and customs declarations forms that we would receive from the shipper. We'd reach out to the shipper to retrieve directly as well. So some of the major challenges that we have in India, and I'm sure many of you who have relocated employees in and out of India may not relate to this. The work culture is very different, and many local companies actually have staff working 50 to 60 hours a week. So from 9 a.m. until 10 p.m. as an example. So it is really important to ensure work-life balance. It's crucial when you're sending someone on assignment, and make sure that they don't get too, I guess, wrapped up in working such long hours in a foreign country, unless absolutely necessary, of course, every now and again. They have projects, deadlines, or lack thereof. Things in India do tend to happen at their own pace. Final arrangements can be cancelled at the last minute, and documents or papers can be delayed by weeks or even months. The cost of accommodation is often expected to be very low, and especially moving to big cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore, which is considered the tech capital, the Silicon Valley of India, the rental costs are very high. There are many companies opting to have employees based in Hyderabad, which they say has a great quality of life. Pune, Kolkata, Nagpur, Noida, where the cost of living and accommodation is lower. According to Condé Nast Traveler, finding a home is one of the top challenges expats face in India. Working with a local DSP is highly recommended, and once again, absolutely no problem if you need. Oh, sorry.
Oh, there you are.
My back. Okay, back in the room. Many expats grapple with the lack of personal space when they first arrive, the lack of fresh air, and adjusting to the humid climate at first. Due to the high population in India, you'll notice waiting in lines, any lines, to be a real struggle. If you're traveling in India, you might need to leave your orderly line waiting habits at home and be ready to hold your ground. Getting your phone working in India is a challenge, as SIM cards don't just work automatically when you put them into the phones, and it can be very, very difficult for foreigners to set up a prepaid or a postpaid contract. Another notable challenge is, so the peak of the monsoon season is July and August, but it usually is running from June to September, more or less. How this affects us on the household goods side? Well, the ports and customs areas in India are known to protect the household goods shipments or containers when they're sitting in port. We do use silica gel bags inside the container and inside cartons to by mold and mildew. And then another hot topic, intra-India moves. So there is really, really high traffic in intra-India moves. this has created increased demand in. However, the supply has been mostly constant because so assignees are facing the challenges of finding a suitable home closer to their offices. Most companies are now offering, and I mean, really, in terms of benefits and policy, this very much does come down to your company individually. As an overview, again, this is basically what we've been seeing. Most companies are now offering both the housing and the moving benefits to their employees so that it makes the process smoother and more organized. And a lot of companies have steered away from the lump sum just because of the, I guess, lack of organization and headache that they end up with at the end of it all. Depending on the location, the road infrastructure in India can be poor. Potholes, congestion, and major traffic delays. Small volumes of household goods. The moving companies in India tend to mostly wait for enough goods to co-load a truck, which results in a longer transit time. So that has been a challenge previously before intra-India became really busy. For us, it became absolutely vital to stress that we needed a closed truck and we wanted a dedicated truck to make the transit time shorter. So yeah, that's one other thing that we have had to deal with. And also remembering that India is a very vast country and culture and traditions vary from region to region, state to state, city to city. It's recommended to engage a local DSP and or cultural trainer to set and manage expectations on housing and school options, as well as language training in some areas. Need to remember that India has 22 official languages and around 447 spoken languages. So Mike, are you fine for me to go ahead and kick off the start of the map?
I am. Absolutely. And I love that you wrapped up India by stressing the diversity, because I think that's extremely important. We found that in Asia as well, is that sometimes it's, especially coming from Europe or the United States or even from Latin America, it's sometimes assumed that if someone from that region is moved to another location, they can be a successful assignment. But actually, sometimes intra-India moves can be more complicated than moving foreigners into the area, simply because the expectations and the support models may not be adequate enough. And just having a country of 22 distinctly, completely different languages, when you're moving from state to state, it becomes a very stressful and difficult environment for people to adapt to. And also keep in mind, too, I would just highlight as well, Lauren, is that in Indian culture, family matters, and extended family is very important too. So in a relocation, if you're moving someone from Bengaluru to Chennai, you're not just moving that employee and their spouse or their children, but they have extended parents that they may be taking care of. And those are all things to think of, especially when giving from a talent perspective, giving offer letters and opportunities to understand that whole family dynamic, that it's not just an easy move because they're Indian. And second off, that they may be having more considerations outside just the job package that they're not adequately addressing in the actual relocation, including grandparents or parents, etc. And also travel within India, as depending on the locations, can be difficult too. So if you're, let's say, 200 km away, but it takes you 30 hours to get there, that's a huge decision to make, especially if you have family that may have health issues or those kind of things. So without diving too deep into that, I think that's a great point for you to have highlighted and summarized, that India is a very, very diverse country, and that needs to be recognized. So on to the Middle East.
Okay. I will start off with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is fast becoming one of the top countries in the region for investors and global corporations to open offices, as well as headquarters for foreign businesses, which was mandated in 2021. Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, has become a global change maker since 2017 with his Saudi Vision 2030 in action, and has already made some huge changes in the kingdom. Some of these notable changes include women being allowed to drive and attend sports events, women not needing to wear an abaya in public, and promoting women in the workforce. With a push to digitalize and embrace new technology, more relaxed rules for expats and the tourism drive with projects like the NEOM $500 billion futuristic megacity, Saudi is paving the way as a future frontrunner in the Middle East. The Crown Prince has also just announced, and this is very recent, I think this was as of yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, 4 special economic zones or gateways to the kingdom as part of the Saudi Vision 2030, set to bring in over 2 million jobs by 2030 even. These zones, covering a wide variety of industries such as investment, trade, and employment, will focus on manufacturing, cloud computing, medical technology, among others. The zones will be called King Abdullah Economic City, Jazan, Ras Al Khair, and Cloud Computing, which is located in the King Abdullah City for Science and Technology. As of last week, Saudi have even introduced an electronic 3-month temporary working visa, which is available on their platform called Kiwa. This gives access to the Ministry of Human Resources, different services in the labor sector. The visa use is valid within 1 year, which can be extended for a similar period, allows the holder of the visa to work for a specific period without the need to issue a work permit and residency. In order to obtain the visa, the enterprise must be active and have a valid commercial registration. And for the application, the enterprise unified number is used. You also, under your commercial registration, you cannot have any expired work permits on your ABSHIR account in Saudi Arabia. One of the notable, I'm not going to take you through the full list of documentation for household goods because it can be a little, most important that you need to know on the household goods side is that we cannot ship the goods without the Saudi Iqama, which is going back to our previous slide from the UAE, the misconception of us being able to ship goods from origin before actually the shipper arrives in the country and has the actual residency permit. So the Saudi Iqama is the national ID card or the residence permit card, basically. And without that, as I said, we can't ship. So previously in Saudi, when it came to household goods, there were a whole bunch of letters required. And it was a real pain, to be honest, because the HRs in Nightmare, there would have to be a dedicated admin person in HR to deal with the letters on behalf of the expatriates, specifically, international expatriates who don't speak or understand or read Arabic, because the letters are all done in Arabic. And there needs to be a company letter, an NOC, a personal NOC or no objections certificate. There were a whole bunch. What they've done is they still have authorization letters applicable, but they have simplified them. And Saudi Arabia Customs have implemented an online authorization, which is called the FASA. This has to be completed by the actual shipper or the assignee that's moving, the owner of the goods. But the complicated part of that is that they cannot access this online authorization outside of the kingdom. So again, you can expect that if you're moving goods into Saudi Arabia from anywhere else in the world, that shipment or those goods will have to be held in storage at origin until such time that the shipper has arrived in Saudi, received his Saudi Iqama, completed his online authorization, the FASA, sent us a screenshot of it so we can send it on to the customs broker. And they also, here's the real kicker, they cannot do any of those things without having their Saudi Arabia mobile number set up, because when you're going through these documents and authorizations, you will receive one-time passwords to your phone. So they actually do need to have their Saudi number sorted. And then we also had a really interesting question come through. What are the most pressing challenges from an immigration and housing perspective? I had spoken to one of my local contacts here who is a DSP to, glean some local information about immigration and housing in Saudi Arabia. As I mentioned, we don't offer the service directly, but yeah, hit me up afterwards and I will gladly share the contact details. So Arabian News actually just released an update as of yesterday as well about a housing crisis in Saudi Arabia. With the huge supply and demand for properties being slightly unmatched, but at the same time, they have said that it's reported anyway that residential development plans are already underway and over 500,000 residential units are being planned across the whole country. So as I mentioned earlier, basically, since they've mandated that multinational corporations need to have a regional headquarters based in Riyadh, of course, this is going to drive a lot more people into the country and specifically into Riyadh. The most affected area in terms of housing at the moment, as it stands, seems to be Riyadh because of this. To give you an idea, I found this really interesting, to give you an idea on the 500,000 units that they are planning to build, just up until a couple of years ago, and it will be more now because the UAE just hasn't stopped building new apartment blocks, villa complexes and things like that. But previously, up until a couple of years ago, the whole of Dubai had 600,000 residential units. So effectively, what Saudi want to accomplish here is they want to build residential units the entire size of a city like Dubai by 2030, to achieve their vision 2030, which I just think is absolutely phenomenal. We also had a question about housing suggestions in Saudi Arabia. So a brief overview, a lot of expats do choose to live in compounds in Saudi Arabia. That's not the only option though. There are also good options for off-compound living, such as many complexes which tend to be cost-effective in cities like Riyadh where the population is high. And a lot of compounds are at full capacity. The compounds are very impressive in terms of accommodation offerings, and typically inside the compounds, you have grocery stores, restaurants, family hangouts, gyms, running tracks, pools, tennis, basketball courts, you name it, it's in there. In Riyadh, I'll give you a couple of examples of typical areas, compounds, residential places that we tend to have a lot of expats moving into. Al Bustan Village, Andorra Village, Al Hamra Oasis Village, Al Olaya compound, Rehab Pearl compound, which is one of the new ones, La Palma Villas. Those are some in Riyadh, and a couple in Jeddah would be Al Basatin Village next to the Continental School, Mura Bustan compound, Salmiya compound, which is mid-city and closer to the schools. As I mentioned, a lot of these compounds do come with loads of different facilities inside the compounds themselves. And now that there are no religious policemen, actually, I was told from a friend of mine who visited Saudi Arabia as a job, her husband just got a job offer there. She was quite shocked and taken aback that inside the compound, even, she was allowed to sport her bikini and not, cover up completely at the pool inside the compound. So yeah, there's definitely changes going on there. One other really important thing to note about accommodation in Saudi Arabia is that most of the compounds offer furnished properties. Some of them have an option to take the furniture out, but that would be usually an expense, an additional cost to the tenant to do so. So that's something really important that I think should be aligned with, your home search specialist, and the assignee needs to be well aware as well to negotiate that as part of the contract. Off compound properties. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you wrapped up. Go ahead. Before you move on to Qatar with just one question, so wrap up what you were talking about, and then I'll present the question.
Okay, great. Off compound properties typically come unfurnished as standard. Short-term or temporary accommodations also available. And what you need to take into account for accommodation in Saudi Arabia is when renting, 10% of annual rent is pretty standard for the deposit paid. And that concludes our Saudi Arabia slide.
And one question about Saudi Arabia before we jump into the next one, Lauren, and this came from Connor Madison. Can you walk us through what is happening while waiting for the necessary documentation from the Saudi government to book the shipment? Is any packing still happening, or is it essentially the HHG survey and then just waiting?
So I love that question, Connor. Thank you. To be honest with you, the majority of the corporate relocations that we're handling into Saudi Arabia are providing their assignees with, as usual, they would normally get 30 days storage and transit, and it's either defined clearly as only at origin or only at destination, or it's just open, right? It is usually explained from the start that either way, storage and transit is going to be needed if the assignee is dead set on packing their shipment at a particular time. What we've been seeing more of since COVID as well, that we, I guess, all need to take into account here, if you have a work from home or digital nomad, set up in your corporation, is that there are going to be shippers and their families who want their stuff packed up sooner than their arrival date, because they have decided that maybe because they're already on assignment, they, say they're coming from the US to Saudi Arabia, but they're actually originally from Italy, for example. They might be going back to Italy to stay there for 2 months to go and see their family before they go to Saudi Arabia. So, of course, in terms of something like that, the visa process and actually shipping the goods is going to take longer. So I would say definitely consider the fact that it would either need to be stored at origin prior to having those documents, or on the HR and global mobility side, it needs to be very clearly stated, look, we don't pack your goods until we have all of your documents in place. And we do deal with some corporate accounts that are, very strict in that regard as well.
Okay, so there's two options basically the company can decide on whether or not they want to, because there would be incurred costs for the storage and then the temp accommodation, obviously if their home is empty. Lauren, we are coming up to a hard stop in about 15 minutes. So I'd like to ask if you could jump into slide 17 that gives a little bit of a wrap up in terms of the shipment types as well as a timeline. We'll talk to that in just about 5 minutes or so.
Sure.
And then if there's any other questions that pop in between then. For everybody else on the call, please know that the presentation will be certainly available. So the other countries that we had to jump over, we do apologize to anybody that is from those countries that we didn't get to talk about today, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, etc., Israel as well. We'll gladly share the PPT. And Andy, thank you so much as well for putting in Lauren's contact details. She's basically one click away from setting up a meeting and should be more than happy to have a one-on-one call with you to talk about the Middle East or any specific location that you're interested in. So Andy, welcome back. I'm going to let Lauren talk about the containers and the move process timeline, and then we'll certainly wrap up within that actually it's less than 15 now. It's about 10 minutes. So go ahead, Lauren.
So in front of you, you will see an example of typical airs and the sea containers as well. The air containers, you'll notice there, the E container, D container, LDN container, and a standard lift van, which is for sea freight shipping. And then the sea container, the standard sea containers as well, a 20-foot container and a 40-foot container. Just to give you a little background on what we experience with the container sizes and some need to know or good to know things about this region particularly. So air shipments, the availability of the actual air containers that you see here in the presentation are pretty scarce in the region. It's always preferred that if available, we bring the air container to the residents to pack and weigh the shipments and ensure that it's within the allowance. A common misconception, which is extremely important, again, in the briefing call discussion stage, is that air shipments are packed. This is the common misconception, that air shipments are packed, put on a plane, and delivered within a few days. Of course, while this would be an ideal situation and can happen, it's important to stress to assignees that the shipment is actually booked as personal effects cargo, which is entirely different to excess baggage. Air shipments are processed through the airport customs on each end, which takes approximately 3 to 5 working days at origin and destination in the region. The average transit time advised is usually for air freight shipments between 10 to 14 days intra-Middle East and 14 to 21 days to most other countries. Sea shipments. So availability of containers is subject to the shipping lines. Shipping lines prioritize commercial cargo for trade over personal effects and household goods, which has been more prevalent since COVID due to the high supply and demand, which so many people, it's basically because everyone is ordering things online since COVID. Everyone's been online. So the personal effects, household goods containers are also on a vessel. When you see a vessel full of containers, household goods containers are always loaded last or on the top of the stack. And that's basically because they're low down the priority for the shipping line, but also because they weigh a lot less than commercial goods for trade. So the challenge that we have faced since COVID with containers, because of this priority issue, it's been like that forevermore with shipping lines and with air cargo as well. Household goods and personal effects have never taken priority well before COVID hit. But as I said, it's just been exacerbated because of COVID. So household goods, basically what's happened is there's been more delays in shipping and more instances of containers not being loaded on board the booked and planned vessel. When this occurs, we as the mover are only actually informed by the shipping line the day after the planned vessel sails, usually. And then we must wait for a revised booking for the next available vessel. Communication with the assignee and the account is crucial in this stage of the move, as it affects so many aspects going forward, such as flight bookings for the arrival into the host country, extension of temp accommodation, rental lease, start dates, etc. So yeah, those are a couple of things to consider about container availability for the region in general as well.
And how about the timeline, Lauren? Oh, fantastic. We'll wrap up on this last slide.
Great. So we wanted to put together a little timeline for you in terms of the process of a door-to-door relocation for household goods. Stage 1 would be the initial inquiry, where you reach out to us with details of the upcoming relocation. Stage 2, we would arrange a pre-move survey, which we would kind of take the lead from the shippers at this point, or the assignees at this point, because, you know, since COVID in household goods, everyone has really had to with moving forward in a digital way. So we can do virtual surveys if people are comfortable, or just really don't have the time or don't want someone in their home to do the survey. In this region, however, people actually prefer to have a physical survey done still. That's what we find over here anyway, and have that, you know, face-to-face interaction, because it's an emotional and very stressful thing that they're going through when they're relocating. Stage 3 would be the actual packing and loading taking place at their residence. Stage 4, we would book the container and would be loaded at dock. Again, that between stage 3 and stage 4 really comes down to whether or not we have the documentation for the destination country all in place and can obtain customs green light. And then stage 5 would be the actual vessel sailing. Stage 6 would be customs clearance once the shipment arrives. And stage 7 would be delivery and unpacking at the residence.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody.